on May 4th, I am turning 40. Oh my gosh. How did that happen? So in celebration of my upcoming 40th birthday, I thought that I would go back, way back. Okay, no, really? Seriously? No, that's a little too far. I thought we could go back and I could tell you my top 40 books of all time. These are the best books I've ever read. This goes back to my 20s. Some of them are from my childhood. Let's dive in. I have 40. I have categorized them all, broken them down. We're gonna start with classics. These are classics as well as modern classics that I have adored. First up is The Great Gatsby. Now, I read this twice in my life, once in high school and once at university. In high school, I hated it. And then in university, I loved it. The Great Gatsby really needs no introduction. This book is about wealth and jealousy. I have highlighted my way through this book and underlined a ton of things and written in the corners. And that's a good sign of a well-loved book. Next is a modern classic. It's also gothic. This is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Rebecca follows a young woman who meets a man very suddenly while she's on holiday taking care of an elderly woman. They fall in love, they get married, and they go back to Manderley. And everyone there very much misses this man's first wife who died. Her name was Rebecca, and Rebecca is everywhere. What happened to Rebecca? Why is everyone obsessed with her? This is so atmospheric. I loved it. Next is Jane Eyre. I've read this a couple of times now, the most recent of which I listened to on audio while I was giving birth to Nora. This is post epidural, I will say that. Jane Eyre is a beautiful book. Jane is a softly confident woman, and she is essentially an orphan, and you follow her life and eventually going to meet a man who she falls for. She falls for him while she's a governess. I adore this book. It's just so good. I love all of these books. I don't need to say that anymore. Next is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This, I would say, is a modern classic sci-fi dystopian book in which women have no autonomy, no ability to control their money. And slowly we enter a world in which women are just there for their bodies. We have handmaids who are there to give birth to children. They are the few people able to get pregnant anymore, and so they give birth to children and pass them along to wealthier couples. Very disturbing. Always feels like this is right around the corner. Hopefully one day it won't feel that way at all. The Color Purple is next. I read this last year and just loved it. This is about Black female friendship, Black love. I adore this book. You will never look at The Color Purple, the actual color, the same way again. Cried my eyes out reading this book. Next is Their Eyes Were Watching God. This used to be my favorite book of all time for a long time. It's still one of my very favorites. Their Eyes Were Watching God is a short little book by Zora Neale Hurston. And this follows Janie, who has gone to live in the 1930s in a Black town, like one of the first all Black towns. And this is about love. There is definitely Black joy in here as well. Oh my goodness, gorgeously written. Such a crescendo at the end. I'll never forget where I was sitting reading this and just flipping the pages at the very end. I think it's nearly time for a reread. And last but not least, for the classics, I've got Pride and Prejudice. Another one where I remember where I was sitting. This follows Jane, it follows Elizabeth, it follows a cast of sisters who are entering society, and they meet several men, several wealthy men, who may or may not be love interests. It's funny. It says a lot about society at the time, and it's my favorite Jane Austen. It just is. Let's move on to some horror books, shall we? So now my favorite horror book of all time is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I loved this book. It's hilarious and terrifying. We meet a group of women in the 90s who have a book club, and they read true crime, and one day a guy moves into the area and he might be a vampire, and it's about their interactions with him and each other. I loved these characters so very much. Next is The Cabin at the End of the World. This is like very graphic, I will say. This follows a little girl named Wen, as well as her dads. They have rented a cottage. They're at some sort of cottage slash cabin, and strangers come to their door wielding very odd objects and say, "We're not going to hurt you. We just need your help to save the world." And the story goes from there. Super disturbing. Oh man, an oldie but a goodie. Bird Box. This is a world in which there's something outside, and if you see that something outside, you go crazy, you kill other people, and you most definitely kill yourself. So we follow a woman who has these two children, and she goes to the backyard where she's staying in this house, blindfolded with her two kids, get into a boat, and she starts going down this river in the hopes of finding a refuge. She's heard that there's a refuge. Will she make it? Will the kids make it? Oh, well, I know, but you'd have to read it to find out. The Little Stranger is next by Sarah Waters. This follows a family who were incredibly wealthy. And unfortunately for them, you know, the tides have shifted in this time. This is after the war, I think after World War I. And their house is now crumbling. We meet a doctor who comes to the house because someone at the house has gotten sick, and he shows up. And there is this dynamic between the middle class and the upper class. And there's also a ghost who shows up every once in a while and terrifies you. Oh my goodness. Next is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. Some people would classify this as a thriller. I always thought of it more as a horror. Small little thing. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is about a girl who's on a road trip with her boyfriend, headed to his parents' house to meet the parents for their first time. She should be excited, but she's thinking of ending things. And she keeps getting these very strange calls on her phone that go to voicemail, and all of these weird, creepy things. Very unsettling. One of those books where you're like, I don't know what's happening until the end. So good. Next is The Woman in Black. Can you tell? I do like a lot of ghosty stuff, I will say, when it comes to horror. The Woman in Black follows a man who is a lawyer, and he's going to this house called Eel Marsh House. The woman who owned it has recently died, and he's there to like tidy up her affairs, but he's not alone because there's a ghost there, and it is terrifying and fun and the perfect thing to read during a thunderstorm. Yes, I've read it a couple of times. So good. And last but not least for horror is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This follows a governess who goes to stay at a house where these two children are, and there are ghosts on the landscape. When they go out for their walks, there are often a man and a woman just standing around in a creepy, creepy way. And she wants to protect these kids. Let's go for some lighter stuff now. We're gonna talk about my favorite children's books. I only have 3 here for you. The first is A Little Princess by Frances Hodgson Burnett. She also wrote The Secret Garden, which is lovely. But A Little Princess follows a little girl who goes to this boarding school. Her father is in the army or something like that, and he has to go away. And she goes there, and for several years she's like the richest girl there and is treated very, very well by the staff. But then her father dies and she is treated horribly, and she's made to go and become a servant at this boarding school. I really loved this. I used to watch the movie version of this with Shirley Temple when I was little, and I really enjoyed it. So read the book, loved that too. Next is The Golden Compass. This is for the whole series, really the whole series. I love this series so much. In this world, we meet Lyra, who is a young girl living at Oxford, and she knows that there are children going missing. They're being stolen, and she wants to get to the bottom of it. And along the way, she meets a lot of very interesting characters. The most interesting character was probably her daemon. It's a world in which when you're a human being, you have this animal living beside you, essentially, and they don't take form, full form, until puberty is over, done and dusted. So her daemon, Pan, he changes shape. So sometimes he's a fox, sometimes he's a weasel. Oh, I love this book so much. The whole series is amazing. Now, I will say I had to include this. This author has done a lot of crap. She has done a lot of damage in the world. So I'm just going to briefly mention Harry Potter. This series has been a favorite of mine in my life. Everyone knows what this is about. I'm not going to go into it. I don't agree in any way, shape, or form with the author's viewpoints. And I would love to be able to replace that at some point with something else. Let's move on to some historical fiction. First up is The Book Thief by Marcus Zizek. In this book, we follow a young girl named Liesel. It is World War II. She lives in Germany, and she goes to stay with this elderly couple who are very lovely people. And time again, she starts stealing books. And books essentially save her through this time. This is a young girl who doesn't understand the war and doesn't understand why they're at war, and she's just trying to have a childhood in the midst of it all, and there's a lot of loss, and she doesn't agree with Nazi thought in any way, shape, or form, and it's about her and her life, and I just adored that book. Next is a more gothic-y kind of book, but it's gothic meets historical fiction. This is Affinity by Sarah Waters. I love this one. This follows a woman who tried to commit suicide, and as a result, the courts have decided that she should volunteer and work at a women's prison. And so she goes and meets a woman in prison, and she is there because she had conducted a seance, and an elderly woman died at the seance. And these two women have an attraction towards each other, and they start having a relationship. I loved this, read it years ago, so good. Okay, next up is Homegoing by Ya Jassi. This is a gorgeous book about two sisters living in Africa. One of them is sold off and basically kidnapped and put into slavery. The other marries a slave owner, or a slave trader, I should say. And it follows the descendants of these two sisters. And every chapter you meet a new character. And I just thought this was gorgeously done. Next is The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This book follows Cora, who is enslaved, and eventually she runs away. And it is her journey running away using the Underground Railroad, which is imagined in this case, in this book, to be an actual Underground Railroad. And this really talks about the actual horrors of slavery and the process of running away, and how that can be glorified in history books and in our culture, when in actuality it's actually quite difficult and hard and brutal. It's brutal. This was amazing. Next up is Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden. I loved this book. It's kind of a romance. This follows a young girl whose parents just can't take care of her anymore. Her mother is dying and her father is very poor from a fishing village, and he sends her away to become a geisha. And she meets a man along the way. You follow her becoming a geisha, which is such an interesting process, the horrible people that she meets along the way, and eventually falling in love with someone and not being able to express her love for him. Next up is The Light Between Oceans by M.L. Stedman. This follows a couple who live on Janus Rock. He is a lighthouse keeper and she is a lighthouse keeper's wife, and they live off the coast of Australia essentially, and they have been very much struggling with trying to get pregnant. They have had multiple miscarriages and it's been incredibly hard on both of them. One day, a boat washes ashore. There's a dead man in the boat and a living and breathing baby, and they take the baby in and call her their own. And there is a lot of ramifications for that. I loved this book and it has made me feel known going through infertility and miscarriage. Oh, last but not least, for historical fiction, this is like historical fiction meets sci-fi. This is Life After Life, and in it we meet Ursula, who lives her life over and over and over again. This follows her when sometimes she dies as a baby and then sometimes she lives several more years, and we follow the many iterations of how her life could have gone, and it goes into World War II, and I just thought this was beautifully done. All of the World War II scenes were so vivid to me. Oh my goodness, please read this. I loved it. Shall we move on to nonfiction? First up is Eat, Pray, Love. This is by Elizabeth Gilbert. I read this after a breakup and it really lifted my spirits. In this book, Elizabeth Gilbert is in the process of breaking up with her husband and she decides to travel the world. She goes to Italy to eat, to India to pray, and eventually Indonesia to fall in love. And I really enjoyed it. I did. It had to be on the list. Next is Wild Swans. This is about a Chinese family living through the Mao regime, and we follow three generations of Chinese women living through it. And I really knew nothing about Chinese history and the Mao regime until reading this, and it opened my eyes, and I just think it was brilliantly done. It is hard to read at times, but so good. Last for nonfiction, guys, is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. This follows Jeanette Walls and her own childhood. Her parents were very eccentric people. Her parents were very dreamy. Her dad always had this idea that he was going to make it one day. And it's about her complicated relationship with her parents. She loved them, but they were also incredibly harmful and probably shouldn't have been parents. Really hard to read at times, but there's a lot of love in here as well, and I just adored it. Okay, we're moving on to thrillers. The first thriller that I have for you is like, again, gothic historical fiction thriller book. This is Tangerine by Christine Mangan. Tangerine follows a young woman who has moved to Tangier with her husband, and she has some anxiety, and so she does stay in her home a lot. One day, her old college roommate named Lucy shows up at her door, very unexpectedly. And they didn't end their relationship on the best of terms, but suddenly she has to like host Lucy in her home. And then her husband goes missing. And it's about the awkward dynamics between these two women. Next is my new favorite thriller of all time. This is Nikki French's Beneath the Skin. Beneath the Skin follows three very different women who are all connected by a series of letters that they have been receiving in the mail. These letters talk about how beautiful they are, how wonderful they are, but also the writer of these letters, he's going to kill them. And he talks about how he's going to kill them, and they are being stalked. It is terrifying, and I cared about each and every one of these women. It's incredible. Okay, next up is Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. You knew there was going to be some Gillian Flynn on this list. Sharp Objects follows a young reporter who goes back to her hometown slightly reluctantly, but she goes back because there are these girls being murdered. They are being strangled, all of their teeth are being taken out, and she needs to go to cover the murders, hopefully find out who's doing it and what's happening to these girls. And she also goes home to her estranged family. She's got a mom who she's really not close to, has some, you know, trauma from her childhood. She's got a stepdad and a stepsister, or a half-sister, I guess. And it's about her dynamics with them, but also these murder cases. So, so good. Next, this one stands in for a whole series. This is Blue Monday by Nikki French. Blue Monday is about Frida Klein, who is a therapist, and she is the central force in the whole series. And Frida Klein has a patient come in who is a man, and he's been talking to her about the infertility he's experiencing with his wife. He's just been having a really hard time of it, and he keeps dreaming of this redheaded boy, and he's redheaded. And then a redheaded boy of a very similar description goes missing, and Frida gets involved. She reaches out to the police, and she gets involved trying to find out, is there a connection? I love Frida. Such a homey character. She's an onion you get to unpeel through the whole series. Oh, amazing. Last thriller that I want to share with you is another Gillian Flynn. This is Gone Girl. This is so much fun. I've read it twice now, and it just gets better with every reread. Gone Girl is about Amy, amazing Amy, who goes missing, and all eyes point to Nick, who is her husband. And you are reading, you know, these diary entries from Amy and trying to find out what happened to her leading up to her disappearance. You're looking at Nick, seeing him go through, you know, all of the painstaking agony of police interrogations, of the media. It is twisty-turny in the best of ways. I will say, if you pick this up, just keep reading, because it can get a little bit hard at the beginning. Okay, last but not least, we're going to go through my favorite contemporary books. First up is Mr. Pip by Lloyd Jones. This is about an island that is going through war, civil war. It happens very suddenly. All of the white people leave except one white man, and he doesn't know what he's doing, but he decides to teach these kids, and he teaches them the only way that he knows how, and that is to read Great Expectations by Charles Dickens to them. It follows his relationship with the students, and it also follows Matilda, who is a little girl. She's 13 years old, and her experience as one of those kids that he teaches. I loved it. I think I'm due for a reread of this one for sure. Next up is a book that I have talked about on my channel a few times, and that is Lily and the Octopus. This is about a gay man named Ted. He is single and sad, and his little dachshund named Lily is really a main joy in his life, and she has cancer. The whole time it is referred to as the octopus because it's this head cancer that, like, you can see it and it kind of looks like an octopus, and it's him battling this octopus and Lily battling the octopus, and also about his own life and the love that he's lost, the love that he wants. I just thought it was funny and also so sad, both at the same time. Next is Come Thou Tortoise. I've talked about this a million times. It's so hard to describe. This follows Audrey, and she is going home because her father has been hit in the head with a Christmas tree. and she has to go home to him to be by his side. She doesn't know whether he's going to live or die, so she gets on an airplane and she leaves behind her pet tortoise named Winifred. And Winifred is a character in here similar to, oh, that's interesting. Anyway, Winifred is a character in here. Audrey is such a lovable character. You meet her Uncle Toby. I really adored this book. Perfect Christmas read. Next is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. This book blew me away. It is short, but it packs such a huge punch. This follows Elwood, who is the most beautiful, wonderful Black boy. He is taken by the police and accused of doing something he did not do, and he's sent to the Nickel Academy. And at the Nickel Academy, a lot of atrocities happen. There is a lot of abuse, physical, sexual, all of the abuses that you can think of happen at the Nickel Academy. And, you know, a lot of Black boys are going missing, and they're just calling their homes and saying, oh, he ran away. But in actuality, they were murdered. And Elwood is just trying to survive his sentencing there. It's not going to be too long, but he just has to make it through. And it's about the friendships that he has at the Nickel Academy. There are twists in here, you know, that shocked me so much that I remember just being like, I couldn't even fathom what was going on, and I almost wanted to reread the whole thing all over again. It's one of those kinds of books. Oh my gosh. The Dutch House is a beautiful story of sibling love. In this book, we meet a brother and a sister who have grown up at the Dutch House, which is this big, beautiful, window-filled home that their father has essentially built and worked on. And they grow up there. Their mother leaves them, and he remarries a fairly terrible woman. And it's about their lives there and how even as adults, they seem to be drawn back to this place over and over again. I loved the sibling love in here. I just thought it was really, really beautiful. And oh my goodness, love Ann Patchett. Next up is Queenie. I've talked about this one a few times. You guys won't be surprised. Queenie follows Queenie, who is a Black woman living in London, and she has this group of amazing friends. I love these friends, and she calls them the corgis because she's the queen and she's got to have her corgis. And it is about the relationship that she's just getting out of. She thinks that they're on a break, but it's really actually over. She's having sex with men who are treating her really improperly, and it's about her discovering her voice, her discovering her own self-worth, self-esteem. It is funny and also triggering at times and hard to read at times, but I absolutely loved it. Next is Hum If You Don't Know the Words by Bianca Merez. This follows a little girl living in South Africa in, is it the 70s? Yeah. Her name is Robin. Her parents die very suddenly, and she goes to live with an aunt. We follow her. She's a little white girl. We also follow Beauty, who is a Black woman whose daughter has gone missing. And these two characters eventually meet. It doesn't happen right away. It takes quite a bit of time, but it is about how they lift one another up. Oh my goodness, this is a beautiful book. I loved Hum If You Don't Know the Words. Oh my gosh, is this the last one? This is the last one. Wow. The last book I want to highly recommend to you is Miracle Creek by Angie Kim. This is about a group of people who are connected because of a concoction called the Miracle Submarine. It's owned by these Korean Americans, and it essentially helps people with, I think, things like infertility and ADHD, that kind of thing. And so you meet a bunch of people going every week for their dose of heavy oxygen in this little Miracle Submarine. And one day there's a fire and people are killed, people are injured. We follow the courtroom trial of a woman who was there with her son, who I think had autism, and he dies, and it seems that like she might have set the fire and actually killed him on purpose. This is so much about how people need to live within their own worlds and not judge other people because you're also being judged all the time. It's about being human and learning to be better. And I loved it. Oh my gosh, those are them. That's it. Those are my favorite books of all time. Like, will I have a YouTube channel in the next 40 years? I'll be 80. Probably not. I don't know. Maybe I will. That would be amazing. But I can't wait to see what gets added onto this list as I read more. I hope that you guys enjoyed this. Please let me know in the comments below if you guys have read any of these and have loved them. If you're going to pick up any of these books, I'd love to know. Also, if any of you are over 40, any recommendations for how to live life? It's a big birthday. I'm not ready for it. I'm not ready. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll talk with you soon. Bye.